Yes, antique wall-mounted with rotary dial. The one that's listed as being $77.50. $60.28 for shipping costs. All the others at free shipping. What do you mean it's too big? It's only 50% bigger than most of the others. I don't recall seeing anything about a set size limit. Listen, I'm going to have to call you back, alright? Alright, thank you. God bless. Goodbye. Huh, there's nobody here. Hello. The single wax seal of evil. Manfred, it is time.
Then we know what we must do.
Indeed. Wow. Is my visual here seem lighter? Feels like it might be lighter.
I don't know,
Sorry, Hey, my voice changed. I can finally do a screeching call. Watch.
Good day, everyone. 'Tis I, the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. Fides Traditio Monarchia! You're probably wondering where Manfred is. Well, now that he can finally do his species' screeching call, he thinks he's too good to be a sidekick anymore, and has gone off to a bird gathering to find himself. Thankfully, my adventure assistant has most graciously agreed to take his place from now on, so everyone, I'd like you all to welcome the Bearded Canadian.
Thank you. And now, without further ado, here we go.
As you remember from our last video, with Oswald's departure and Felix's fall from fame, it looked like Mickey Mouse would soon become the face of animation. There was just one thing Disney didn't count on: competition. It has been said that in every business, a little competition is healthy, as it encourages each brand to constantly strive to produce the best product they can. As you know from our previous videos, Disney was not the first to come into animation, but he may have been the first one to substantially increase its competitive nature. In almost no time at all after Mickey Mouse debuted, his popularity had overtaken Felix the Cat and put him out of work, overshadowed Walt's previous success of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and made Universal's cartoons of him less successful, forced Paul Terry's cartoons into the background, and remained unchallenged by any remaining animation studio. With so little competition remaining to keep Disney on his guard, animation might have progressed quite differently had it not been for the reemergence of a studio that had been innovating in animation since 1919. As you may remember from our third video, Austro-Hungarian animator Max Fleischer was arguably the first animator after Winsor McCay to introduce new innovations to the field of animation. This began with his development of the rotoscope, a combined projector and easel for tracing images from live-action film. This device enabled artists to trace outlines from single frames of a motion picture in order to create animated characters that move like real-life people, enabling more realistic animation. Max Fleischer, along with his brothers Joe and Dave Fleischer, performed a series of tests using the rotoscope between 1914 and 1916, after which a patent was granted to them in 1917. The Path Film Exchange offered Max his first opportunity as a producer, due in part to the fact that Dave had been working there as a film cutter since 1914. Max chose a political satire of a hunting trip taken by Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh my! Did you know that Teddy Roosevelt is here on safari?
In Africa? Which part?
This part.
Of course, political satire is generally not the best way to begin one's career in film, and after several months of labor, the film was rejected. Max was making the rounds again when he was reunited with John R. Bray in an outer office at Paramount. Bray had a distribution contract with Paramount at the time and hired Max as a production supervisor for his studio, known as the Bray Studios, or Bray Productions, which already had experience with cartoons from producing Paul Terry's Farmer Alfalfa. Paul Terry would leave a year later, though, taking the character with him, and later going on to produce one of the first sound cartoons, Dinner Time, as well as his own series, Terry Toons. After America entered the Great War, John Bray assigned Max Fleischer's units to create training and educational cartoons for the U.S. Army, and he was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to produce the first Army training films on subjects that included contour map reading, operating the Stokes mortar, firing the Lewis machine gun, and submarine mine laying. Following the armistice, Fleischer returned to Bray and the production of theatrical and educational films.
Bray took a particular interest in one of Max Fleischer's later rotoscope tests, which was made from footage of his brother Dave when he worked as a sideshow clown on Coney Island. Inspired by this footage, Max Fleischer began the series Out of the Inkwell on August 30th, 1919, and introduced Coco the Clown. Although when first introduced, he was known simply as the Clown and didn't receive the name Coco until 1924.
Fleischer's initial series was first produced at the Bray Studios and released as a monthly installment in the Bray Goldwyn Pictograph Screen magazine from 1919 to 1921. In addition to producing Out of the Inkwell, Max's position at Bray was primarily production manager and supervisor of a number of educational and technical films such as The Electric Bell, All Aboard for the Moon, and Hello Mars. Boy, must be years and years ahead of their time. We still haven't gotten to Mars, have we? Nope.
Not yet.
Quite frankly, I'm not sure we ever will.
Well, there is a planning time, right?
Yeah,
for
but I
people
mean...
to go to Mars in the next, 20, 30 years or something?
Men landed on the moon in 1969, and we've pretty much done nothing since then. So
Hubble telescope.
yeah, but have
A
we?
couple other things.
I mean, people expected there to be a moon base. I mean, we haven't even been to the moon since 1971, I think.
How do we know? It could be a conspiracy.
Now you're going to bring in the conspiracy theorists.
No, I just... you never know. There could be something up there the government doesn't tell us. Why would the government tell us anyways?
Where was I? Oh, yes. Yes. And it was as production manager that Fleischer hired his first animator, Roland Crandall, who remained with him throughout the active years of Fleischer's studio.
However, the Inkwell featured the novelty of combining live action and animation and served as a semi-documentary to the appearance of Max Fleischer as the artist, who dipped his pen into the ink bottle to produce the clown on his drawing board. While the technique of combining animation with live action was already established by others at the Bray studio, it was Fleischer's clever use of it combined with his realistic animation that made his series unique.
Overall, I would say that Coco the Clown
More
was...
man stuff. It's more,
Overall, I would say that Coco the Clown was an entertaining character. Right from the start in the Clown's Pub, the Fleischers were using impressive visual effects to show live-action people interacting with cartoon characters. This is especially remarkable when one considers that this was done in 1919, when traditional animation as a medium was only 11 years old, and even in those 11 years, relatively little had been accomplished since the initial works of Winsor McCay. The Clown's Pub is both an entertaining short and a demonstration of what was to come. In 1921, Max and Dave Fleischer left Bray Studios, taking the clown with them, and established their own studio, Out of the Inkwell Films Incorporated, and continued production of Out of the Inkwell through various States' rights distributors. In 1924, Dick Humer came aboard after animating on the early Mutt and Jeff cartoons. He set the style for the series, redesigning the clown, and named him Coco. Humer also created Coco's canine companion known as Fitz, and moved the Fleischers away from their dependency on the rotoscope for fluid animation, leaving it for special uses and reference points where compositing was involved. And because Max valued Humer's work, he instructed him to make just the key poses and have an assistant fill in the remaining drawings. Max assigned Art Davis as Humer's assistant, and this was the beginning of the position of in-betweener, which was essentially another Fleischer invention that resulted in efficient production and was adopted by the entire animation industry by the 1930s.
Impressive. It was during this time that Max developed the rotograph, a means of photographing live-action film footage with animation cells for a composited. A means of photographing live-action film footage with animation cells for a composited image. This was an improvement over the method used by Bray when a series of 8x10-inch stills were made from motion picture film and used as backgrounds behind animation cells. The rotograph technique went into more general use known as the aerial image photography and was a main staple in animation and optical effects. It was a main staple in animation and optical effects companies for making titles and various forms of matte composites. For making titles in various forms of matte Sorry. Okay, let's try this again. And optical effects companies for making titles in various forms of matte composites. In 1924, Fleischer partnered with Edwin Miles Fadiman, Hugo Reisenfeld, and Lee DeForest to form Red Seal Pictures Corporation, which owns 36 theaters on the East Coast, extending as far west as Cleveland, Ohio. During this period, Fleischer invented the follow the bouncing ball technique in his Coco Song cartoon series of animated sing-along shorts. Of the 36 song cartoons, 12 used the DeForest phonofilm sound-on-film process. This preceded Walt Disney's Steamboat Willie, 1928, which has been erroneously cited for decades as the first cartoon to synchronize sound with animation. It wasn't. The song cartoon series lasted until early 1927 and were interrupted by the bankruptcy of the Red Seal Company just 5 months before the official start of the sound era. Just 5 months.
Alfred Weiss, owner of Artcraft Pictures, approached Fleischer with a contract to produce cartoons for Paramount. Due to legal complications of Red Seal's bankruptcy, the Out of the Inkwell series was renamed the Inkwell Imps and ran from 1927 to 1929. This was the start of Fleischer's relationship with the huge Paramount organization, which lasted for the next 15 years. After a year, the Fleischer brothers started experiencing mismanagement under Weiss and left the company in late 1928. Finally, in January 1929, Inkwell Films Incorporated filed bankruptcy. It looked like Disney had finally driven its last competitor out of the business. For a moment, it seemed there would be no competition for Disney, and the state of animation would be thrown out of balance. But this time, something changed. In March 1929, only 2 months after Inkwell Films filed for bankruptcy, Max Fleischer formed Fleischer Studios Incorporated and set up operations at Carpenter Goldman Laboratories in Queens with a small staff, and after just 8 months, his new company was solvent enough to move back to its former location at 1600 Broadway, where it would remain until 1938. While with Carpenter Goldman, Max Fleischer began working on instructional films for the animation industry, including Finding His Voice in 1929, a demonstration film illustrating the Western Electric Variable Density sound recording and reproduction method. In spite of the conflicts with Alfred Weiss, Fleischer managed to negotiate a new contract with Paramount to produce a revised version of the song cartoons, renamed Screen Songs, produced with sound beginning with The Sidewalks of New York. Despite what no doubt seemed like an extremely fortunate turn of events, Max Fleischer was still without a lead character that could compete with Mickey Mouse.
Wait, what about Coco?
Good question. Unfortunately, during the last few years of Inkwell Studios, Coco had become mired in legal entanglements. In the films produced under Red Seal from 1924 to 1927, the clown's name was hyphenated Coco, but due to legal complications resulting from Red Seal's bankruptcy, the hyphen in Coco's name was dropped, and Out of the Inkwell was retitled as the Inkwell Imps. And when Inkwell Films filed bankruptcy in 1929, the character Coco was put into retirement for 2 years. At any rate, although Max Fleischer's screen songs were successful, he felt that it wasn't enough. Walt Disney also seemed to gain a great amount of fame through his sound cartoons as well. Max decided to work with his brother Dave on a new series of cartoons where the characters did more than just simply dance to the music of the bouncing ball. The name for this new series was to be Talk Cartoons. When the idea was pitched to Paramount, they leaped at the opportunity.
The Talk Cartoons started out as one-shot cartoons. Their first entry in the series was Noah's Lark, released on October 25th, 1929.
Strange, that almost sounded like the Popeye theme.
The elephant and the kangaroo, there's a wide river to cross. There's a wide river, and that wide river is Noah. There's a wide river, there's a wide river to cross.
Although a Fleischer cartoon, it appeared to be patterned after the Aesop's film fables of Paul Terry.
Yes, that music was definitely the same music that was later used at the opening to the Popeye cartoons. Huh, how about that?
In it, a farmer, alfalfa-esque, Noah, allows the animals of his art to visit Luna Park.
Sure, leave!
When he brings it back into the ship, the weight is so heavy that it sinks. In the end, Noah chases topless mermaids throughout the ocean waters.
What? That can't be right.
That's what happened. Take a look.
Oh dear. Anyway, on March 29th, 1930, there appeared the Fleischer's new lead character, a character that was meant to be a rival to Disney's Mickey Mouse, someone to be Fleischer Studios' heavy hitter in the now highly competitive world of animation. Fittingly, this character was named Bimbo, and
Wait, the character was named Bimbo.
yes, what of it?
Was she a blonde-haired, buxom, curvaceous woman with plump cherry red lips?
No, you ninny, Bimbo was a dog.
Well, that's not a very nice thing to say about her. You may not find her very attractive, but...
No, I mean the character Bimbo was literally a dog.
Oh, I see. Was she a slinky, anthropomorphized French poodle with long legs and an hourglass figure?
You ninny. Bimbo was based off a dog named Fitz that had previously appeared in the series Out of the Inkwell.
Like, was she a slinky, anthropomorphized French poodle with long legs and an hourglass figure?
No! Fitz was male and so was Bimbo.
Well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it does. The name Bimbo was chosen for the dog because in the 1920s the word was associated with men who liked to fight. And fight was exactly what the Fleischers needed Bimbo to do in order to compete with characters such as Mickey Mouse.
So, when did the word bimbo become associated with blonde-haired, buxom, curvaceous woman with plump cherry red lips?
I'm not sure exactly. The word was originally associated with men who liked to fight. I think after a while, wanting to fight all the time became viewed as foolishness, so the word became associated with foolishness, and then became associated with blondes due to the stereotype of them being unintelligent or foolish. And then that developed further due to comics and 3D generated artworks, which, wait a minute, why are we talking about the origins of modern sexualized language? We're supposed to be outlining the history of animation. Now, let's get back to work and... Oh dear me. Looks like it's that time again. Perhaps we could continue this after tea.
You just said we need to get back to work.
Well, excuse me, but it's tea time, isn't it? Imagine reviewing straight through the day like animals. So uncivilized.
Alright, cool it.
Good, now that that's settled, would you like some tea?
No.
Suit yourself, more for me. Anyway, the series... Oh, wait. Yes.
Oh, Michael's still in there. Actually surprised.
Anyway, the series began to take a new direction with the arrival of Max and Dave's brother, Lou Fleischer, whose skills in music and mathematics made a great impact at the studio. Bimbo became the protagonist and star of Fleischer's Talk Cartoon series, positioned as a rival to Disney's Mickey Mouse, making his first appearance as Bimbo in Hot Dog, 1930, though Bimbo's design wouldn't become standardized until around 1931. Hot Dog was the first Fleischer cartoon to use a full range of grays. New animators such as Grim Natwick, Seamus Colhane, and Rudy Zamora began entering the Fleischer studio, with new ideas that pushed the Talk cartoons into a league of their own. Natwick especially had an offbeat style of animating that helped give the shorts more of a surreal quality. Perhaps his greatest contribution to the Talk Cartoon series in the Fleischer studio was the creation of a character that would eventually eclipse Bimbo's popularity. This character was Betty Boop. Betty Boop was born out of a cameo caricature in the early Talk cartoon Dizzy Dishes in 1930. Fashioned after popular singer Helen Kane, who herself was based off Baby Esther, she originated as an attractive anthropomorphized French poodle with a tall, slim hourglass figure, along with long ears to signify she was still a dog.
I knew it! I knew there would be
Quiet! Betty Boop was such a sensation in the New York preview that Paramount encouraged Fleischer to develop her into a continuing character, and she became the recurring girlfriend of Bimbo. While she originated as a hybrid poodle figure under veteran animator Myron, or Grim, Natwick, she was transformed into a totally human female under Seymour Neidl and Bernie Wolf, and her dog-like ears were redesigned into earrings. Betty Boop soon became Fleischer's biggest star. By late 1931, Betty Boop dominated the series. Coco the Clown was brought out of retirement from the silent days as a third character to Betty and Bimbo. But Bimbo became a less prominent character after his girlfriend gained unexpected stardom and popularity with the fans. By 1932, the series was at an inevitable end, and instead, Betty Boop would be given her own series, with Bimbo and Coco as secondary characters, which would continue for the next 7 years. After Hays Code censorship rules began to get strictly enforced in 1934, Bimbo disappeared from future Fleischer cartoons of the era due to the implications of an anthropomorphic dog dating a human girlfriend being too risque at the time.
They wouldn't have had to worry about that if they just kept her as an anthropomorphized poodle.
Yes, I'm sure all the anthropomorphized animal lovers are applauding.
You know, there really should just be a short term for anthropomorphized animals. It just takes way too long. Just saying.
I'm sure there's a slang term out there somewhere, but you know the rules. We try not to use slang here unless it's absolutely necessary.
Wait, who decides when slang is necessary?
Well,
And for that matter, who decides when slang is slang as opposed to common usage?
Well, it usually...
And well read, isn't the word slang also slang?
Alright already. We'll discuss it after the video. Bimbo would later be brought back for more modern incarnations of the series beginning in 1989. But Coco faded into obscurity, his last theatrical appearance being in the Betty Boop cartoon Ha 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 in 1934, a remake of the Out of the Ink While Silent 1924's The Cure. Fleischer's cartoons were very different from the Disney product, both in concept and in execution. They were rough rather than refined. The Fleischer approach was sophisticated, focused on surrealism, dark humor, adult psychological elements, and sexuality. The Fleischer environments were grittier and urbane, often set in squalid surroundings, a reflection of the Depression as well as the German Expressionism which Max Fleischer embraced.
Construction processes and machinery are found in some stories, mirroring Max's view of mechanics as the art form of the 20th century, but most of all, Fleischer saw animation as the cartoonist's cartoon, and in his early works avoided the literal approach that Disney was taking. As Fleischer stated, if it can be done in real life, it isn't animation.
Overall, I would say that the Betty Boop cartoons and Fleischer cartoons in general were quite good. From an animation perspective, they were high quality, and they always seemed to be on the cutting edge of new technology in animation. Yes, they weren't as child-friendly as the Disney cartoons of that time were. But what few people remember is that cartoons weren't originally intended to be for children. Sure, children could watch them, but they were originally intended to play before full-length feature films, and those films tended to be directed more at adults than children, mainly due to the fact that adults generally had more money to spend on seeing them. Then again, films at that time tended to have less objectionable content than some of the films coming out today, so it's often a matter of perspective. But I digress. While Betty Boop was a successful character for some time, and most people today would still recognize her, Fleischer Studios would be most remembered for a character that wasn't even theirs. In 1933, Fleischer Studios licensed the comic strip character Popeye the Sailor, introducing him to audiences in the Betty Boop cartoon Popeye the Sailor in 1933. Popeye became a box office champion and was one of the most successful screen adaptations of a comic strip in cinema history. Much of this success was due to the perfect match of the Fleischer Studios style combined with its unique use of music. Music which became so popular that even people who never watched any Popeye cartoons have probably still heard Popeye's theme music. I know I have. My grandfather used to sing it all the time. Yes. By the late 1930s, a survey indicated that Popeye had eclipsed Mickey Mouse in popularity, challenging Disney's presence in the market.
During its zenith by the mid-1930s, Fleischer Studios was producing 4 series: Betty Boop, Popeye, Screen Songs, and Color Classics, resulting in 52 releases each year. That's a lot. It also wasn't just the series' popularity that helped Fleischer Studios, but also another cutting-edge innovation in animation. The setback camera, sometimes erroneously called the stereotypical process, which was used in a number of shorts and in the feature film Mr. Bug Goes to Town in 1941.
Stereoptical, not stereotypical.
Sometimes called the stereoptical process, which was used in a number of shorts and in the feature film Mr. Bug Goes to Town in 1941.
The setback is often confused with Disney's multiplane camera. Both systems evolved somewhat contemporaneously, and both create the illusion of dimensional depth, but functionally they have very little in common. The setback rig consists of a forced perspective miniature set mounted on a turntable, serving as the background to the cell art held in a vertical glass platen, and a horizontal animation camera. The turntable is rotated incrementally behind the cells, creating the effect of a tracking shot. The 2D animated character in a side view walk cycle traverses a realistically proportioned, but still recognizably Fleischer-esque 3D environment, which moves perspectively across the background. This may not seem all that impressive by today's standards, but the fact that they were able to do this back then is actually quite amazing. Getting the setback rig to work at all would have been a major technical feat. The lighting challenges alone seem headache-inducing, and it's easy to imagine that 1930s audiences, unaccustomed to full 3D motion in cartoons, were amazed by the on-screen results. Yet, the scenes in which the studio deployed setback shots seem chosen at random. Setback made its public debut during a fast and comical chase scene in the Popeye short For Better or Worser in 1935. But in 1936's Little Sweet Pea, the setback shots accompany such humdrum utilitarian scenes, such as Popeye walking or Popeye pushing a stroller, that the overall effect is underwhelming. The setback camera was used to the greatest degree in the two-wheel Popeye features Popeye the Sailor Man meets Sinbad the Sailor in 1936, and Popeye the Sailor meets Alibaba's 40 Thieves in 1937. In the first, some shots feature an additional foreground layer of sliding 3D scenery between camera and platen, with the nearer objects convincingly off focus. The animators found new ways to make the drawn characters interact spatially with the backgrounds.
Oh, yeah. Trying to scare me like that, huh?
Popeye climbs a staircase, walking between two balustrades built into the turntable, and Bluto convincingly enters a 3D cave. Some shots vary the turntable velocity, with the animation timed accordingly. In one of the better executed gags, 2D Bluto plunges his hands into a 3D treasure chest and scoops out handfuls of 2D gems. The lighting crew evidently struggled to eliminate shadows and glare from these more complex shots, sometimes without success.
In the second two-reel cartoon, the setback camera is used to the film's final shot, in which Popeye and Olive Oyl ride a 3D wagon, its wheels spinning in stop motion, and then pan within the setback shot reveals 2D Bluto and his vanquished team of bad guys towing the wagon.
Maybe a shorty, but I like the 40. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man.
Disney's multiplane camera, though technically complex, only shot 2D artwork. Fleischer attempted something more ambitious, in-camera compositing of 2D and 3D animation, decades before it became possible to do so optically or digitally. In fact, such a thing wouldn't occur again until Disney began taking this approach by augmenting some of their films with CG beginning in around the mid-1980s. A reward for the first person to guess the film this first occurred in. Perhaps Setback was born too soon. Despite its heady promise of merging the 2D and 3D worlds, the system was effectively a one-trick pony. The technical limitations became narrative ones. Since the forced perspective effect depended on a fixed axis between the camera and turntable, Setback was constrained to panning along the x-axis. An efficient, but not very engaging way of moving a character from here to there. And as a side note, that is likely why in the Tom and Jerry cartoons they run past that same table about 20 times. If Fleischer ever attempted moving one of the setback elements in Z-space, the results must have been judged unfit for presentation. The more flexible multi-plane system allowed Z-axis camera moves, which drew the audience into the pictorial space.
At any rate, the double-legged Popeye cartoons demonstrated Fleischer's interesting animated feature films. While Fleischer petitioned for this for 3 years, it was not until the success of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, that Paramount executives realized the value of Mark's proposals and ordered one for a 1939 Christmas release. But this request came at an awkward time. See, the popularity of Popeye cartoons had created a demand for more. To meet Paramount's demands, the studio was challenged with a rapid expansion, production speed-ups, and crowded working conditions. Finally, in May 1937, Fleischer Studios was affected by a 5-month strike, resulting in a boycott that kept the studio's releases off theater screens until November. Max, having a paternal attitude towards his employees, took it personally as if he had been betrayed and developed an ulcer. Ouch.
In March 1938, Paramount approved Max's request to produce a feature just when he was preparing to move the studio from New York City to Miami, Florida. The relocation was motivated by several reasons, some related to the strike, others due to the need for more space and the lure of a tropical work environment. Once in Miami, relations between Max and Dave began deteriorating, starting with the pressures to deliver their first feature and complicated further by Dave's adulterous relationship with his secretary, Mae Schwartz. Jonathan Swift's classic, Gulliver's Travels, was a favorite of Max's, and pressed into production. Fleischer and Paramount originally budgeted the film in 1938 at $500,000 American dollars, or around $8,950,000 in 2018 money, the same miscalculation made by Disney with Snow White. The final cost for Gulliver's Travels was 3 times that much, at $1.5 million, or around $26,800,000. It played limited engagements in only 30 theaters during the Christmas season of 1939 and made roughly $3 million, or roughly $54,390,000 in 2018 money, giving Paramount a profit of $1.5 million, or roughly $27,200,000 in 2018 money, before going into foreign release. But Fleischer Studios was penalized $350,000, around $6,350,000, for going over budget, and the contract did not allow Max or Fleischer Studios to participate in the foreign earnings.
In 1940, Max was relegated to business affairs and continued technical development. His efforts resulted in a reflex camera viewfinder and line transfer methods to replace the time-consuming and tedious process of cell inking.
That same year, several new series were launched under the leadership of Dave. Gabby and Animated Antics, both of which were spin-offs featuring characters from their film Gulliver's Travels, and Stone Age, which was in many ways a precursor to the idea later used in Hanna-Barbera's The Flintstones. Sadly, all these series failed, even Stone Age, which says something about the later success of The Flintstones. At any rate, Fleischer and Paramount experienced lost revenues due to the failure of these new series. After Republic Studios allegedly failed to develop the Superman comics into a live-action serial, Max acquired the license that fall and initiated development. The cost for the Superman series has been grossly overstated for decades based on Dave Fleischer's 1968 interview. The actual figure stated in Fleischer's contract was in the $30,000 or around $540,000 range, twice the cost of a Popeye cartoon. Superman was a reflection of the type of serious cartoons that were not being made by rival studios. Their science fiction fantasy elements appealed to Max's interests, finally leading the studio into maturity and relevance for the 1940s. The early returns on Gulliver prompted Paramount president Barney Balaban to order a second feature for their 1941 Christmas release. This second feature, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, was unique, having a contemporary setting, that is, being set around the year it was released, much like 101 Dalmatians. And was technically superior to Gulliver's Travels. Paramount had high hopes for its Christmas 1941 release, which was well received by critics during its December 5th preview. However, things did not go as planned. Contrary to the understanding for decades, the bombing of Pearl Harbor did not cancel its release, especially when Paramount's other releases continued to go forward. Rather, the exhibitors rejected it, fearing that releasing such a light-hearted film so soon after a nationally felt tragedy would not be good for business. And with the abolition of block booking, Paramount could not force its release and made no creative effort to market it.
After the film's failure in theaters, Max was called to a meeting with Balaban in New York where he asked him for his resignation. Dave having resigned a month before. Paramount finished out the remaining 5 months in the 1941 Fleischer contract with the absence of both Max and Dave Fleischer, and the change to Famous Studios became official on May 27, 1942. Paramount installed new management, among them Max's son-in-law, Seymour Natal.
Unable to form a studio for the demand for military training films, Fleischer was brought in as head of the animation department for the industrial film company, the Jam Handy Organization, in Detroit, Michigan. While there, he supervised the technical and cartoon animation departments, producing training films for the Army and Navy. Fleischer was also involved with top-secret research and development
Where's Mahoney hitting the fillings?
for the war effort, including an aircraft bomber sighting system. In 1944, he published Noah's Shoes, a metaphoric account of the building and loss of his studio, casting himself as Noah.
After the war,
Fleischer
stayed secluded in a deep depression that seemed endless.
Hey, quit goofing around.
Following the war, he supervised the production of the animated adaptation of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 1948. No, not the Rankin Bass one.
Rankin Bass.
No, not the Rankin Bass one. Sponsored by Montgomery Ward. No. Sponsored by Montgomery Ward. Fleischer left Handy in 1953 and returned as productive manager for the Bray Studios in New York, where he developed an educational television pilot about unusual birds and animals titled Imagine That.
Max eventually formed a friendship with his old rival, Walt Disney, who welcomed Max to a reunion with former Fleischer animators who were by then employed by Disney. However, in his collection of memoirs entitled Just Tell Me When to Cry, Fleischer's son Richard, working for Disney directing his adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
Disney presents 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Relates how at the mere mention of Disney's name, Max would mutter, "That son of a biscuit."
Biscuit? I could go for a biscuit.
No, that's just the line.
You really sick biscuit?
Well, no, but I'm certainly not going to repeat the word he did say.
Although we all know what the word is.
Hey, there could be children watching. Although, probably not, but you never know.
Oh my god, it's something popular.
Eh. Fleischer won his lawsuit against Paramount in 1955 over the removal of his name from the credits of his films. While Fleischer had issues over the breach of contract, he had avoided suing for a decade to protect his son-in-law, Seymour Natal, who was a lead director at Paramount's Famous Studios. In 1958, Fleischer revived Out of the Inkwell Films Incorporated and partnered with his former animator, Hal Seeger, to produce 100 color Out of the Inkwell cartoons for television, which ran from 1960 to 1961.
The clown. Out of the inkwell comes Coco the clown. He's so gay and he's so jolly, he will make you laugh by golly. He gets in every kind of trouble, but makes it vanish like a bubble.
Actor Larry Storch performed the voices of Coco and supporting characters Coconut and Mean Mo. While Max appeared in the unaired pilot, he became too ill to appear in the series and, while in poor health, spent the rest of his life regaining ownership of Betty Boop. Fleischer, along with his wife Essie, moved to the Motion Picture Country House in 1967. On September 25th, 1972, Fleischer died from arterial sclerosis of the brain, and the press announced his passing Dean of Animated Cartoons. His death preceded the reclaiming of his star character, Betty Boop, and a national retrospective. The Betty Boop scandals of 1974 started the Fleischer Renaissance, with new 35mm prints of a selection of the best Fleischer cartoons made between 1928 and 1934. This was followed by the Popeye Follies. These special theatrical programs generated interest in Max Fleischer as the alternative to Walt Disney, spawning a new wave of film research devoted to an expanded interest in animation beyond trivial entertainment. Animation is recognized as an art as well as a science due to the vision and life work of Max Fleischer. I'm the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. God bless you all, and remember, fides traditio monarchia.
If you enjoyed this video, think about leaving a like, a comment, or subscribe. You can keep up with our videos and help us reach our goal of 100 subscribers.
1,000.
That seems a little too high considering we just started.
We already have over 450 subscribers.
Oh, okay, never mind. I'll say it again. So I didn't realize. So, if you enjoyed this video, think about leaving a like, comment, or subscribing so you can keep up with all of our videos and help us reach our first goal of 1,000 subscribers. We're getting there, people.
If there's something you didn't like, why not try to, instead of just hitting the dislike button, actually comment and tell us what you feel we could doing better in the future. Nobody ever got better by anonymous dislikes or negative comments that don't explain themselves. But constructive criticism can be a helpful tool.
He needs it.
So does he.
Way back there in the Stone Age, 10,000 years ago, the world wasn't so different. Newsboys delivered the morning paper, much as they do now. But they did it the hard way. And as usual, Mrs. Caveman got the paper first. And when a sale was advertised, the cave wife would utter that familiar cry,
A sale!
much to the annoyance of her husband.
Oh. Henry, you're going shopping with me, do you hear?
No, I'm not. I hate shopping. I hate stores. I hate crowds. I hate to go anywhere.
I said you're going shopping with me.
The missus always won. Then they were willing to bury the hatchet. But they buried a club instead. And the lady loved it. Simple, wasn't it? Going shopping was such a drag for the poor husband.
Go on.
I'm going.
Henry, you get these articles and meet me here.
Yes, they used their heads in those days.
Look this way, folks. I shall demonstrate our latest model.
And they even had those. Yes, things were pretty much the same.
I got a good bargain. I had something.
Women shoppers were just as considerate.
This form-fitting garment aspires to please the most vivacious female. Not the enchantment it lends to the face. It adds an air of sophistication to the most petite and demure madame. And this model will glorify your charms. Note the youthful lines, the puffy sleeves, the fluffy coat, the duffy blouse. Oh, pardon me. Even the spots before your eyes give grace to the form and follow the contour of the body right down to the extreme end.
Waffle irons sold like hotcakes. Oh. They had their firefighting apparatus, even though it was only a trunk line.
What's the matter with you, Danny? Can't you see I'm demonstrating downhill pipes?
Service, service. A dinosaur delight was the favorite drink in those days. And their shopping bags. Why, they were better than the ones we have today. Ours can't walk. And for the music lover, there were slabs of song hits. But I wouldn't want to be hit by one. Let Your Hair Down was number 1 on the rock pile.
Play this one, please.
Okay.
Come on, trumpet, hit it! Hit it till you get it. Let your hair down. Come on, drummer, beat it till you eat it. Let your hair down. Everybody loves the one-man band, so everybody gives this guy a great big welcome hand. Swing it, drummer, swing it, swing it till you ring it. Let your hair down. Deep, 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 deep. Deep, 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 deep. Deep, 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 deep.
So you hate shopping? Take me home.
That's the way women were treated in those days, and they loved it.
Hold that thought for a moment, and I'll edit this part out.
You know you can keep it in, right? Yep, kick it in. You're a whale?
No, that's just to get the water all over the... Now, when you talk for long enough, you get a dry mouth, and it's rather unpleasant.
You get used to it.
No, I'd rather not.
Wimp. Yeah, I talk for hours online. You don't see me complaining.